my name is Monique Jolicia. I am a registered nurse from Miami, Florida, who came to New York City to help with the COVID-19 pandemic. I have been here for 30 days helping, and it has been quite the experience, to say the least. So it has been brought to our attention via videos as well as articles saying that nurses in New York City are quote-unquote murdering people. Just to give you a little background of the perspective that I'm coming from, I have been a nurse for 8 years, a traveling nurse for 5, and I have lived in 14 different states. And so my perspective is based off of just all of those experiences that I've had and all of the different emergency rooms that I've worked in. Forbes magazine has this definition on perspectives that I want to share with you. It says perspective is the way individuals see the world. It comes from their personal point of view and is shaped by life experiences, values, their current state of mind, the assumptions they bring into a situation, and a whole lot of other things. Reality can be different things. We can easily say that my perspective is my reality. There is truth to that statement. When we look at the shared reality of an event, though, the more perspectives you get, the closer to reality you get. So I am here today to just share my perspective on the situation with you, not to change your perspective or change your mind, just to give you an additional perspective to your puzzle so that you can make your own informed decision on how you want to feel. I have worked in New York City 2 times before in the past, and I will say that generally speaking, New York City has never been the best place to work as a nurse, to be honest. The nursing ratios in New York City are not that great. So in a lot of other states and cities, in the emergency room, the ratios for the nurse to the patient will be like anywhere from 3 patients per nurse to 5 on average, hit or miss. Depending on the emergency room, some are a little bit less, some are a little bit more. But in New York City, a lot of the emergency rooms, they don't have any patient ratios. So we're talking about nurses typically in New York City have, when I worked in New York, I had like 15 patients in the emergency room for just me, pre-COVID. This was like years ago. So the staffing in New York has never been that good to begin with. That's always been a problem. So I want to tell you a few things that I think a lot of nurses were in a big surprise for when they arrived here. One being, a lot of nurses that have come here have never worked at a lot of other hospitals. Many nurses that have come here have never traveled nursed. There are only a few of us, well, not a few, but a minority of us are actually travel nurses, including myself. One of the most common causes for complaints are unmet expectations. Whether it's a marriage, whether it's a restaurant, people's expectations do not get met, and therefore they write complaints. I think when a lot of nurses arrived to New York City, they were expecting a certain type of healthcare. And when they arrived here, they realized that their expectations were not met. I think that the type of healthcare a lot of nurses were expecting was our beautiful first world country, America healthcare. Especially when a lot of nurses are not travel nurses. That makes a difference because nurses who have done travel nursing, we have worked in several different hospital settings and we have learned all the different ways to do things. A lot of these nurses that have come here have either, a lot of them sacrificed and quit their jobs or left. A lot of nurses I've met, this is the very first travel assignment or anything like that they have ever done, or they have only worked at 1 or 2 other hospitals in the past. So they come and they compare the healthcare here to the healthcare back at home. Now COVID comes along, right? And there are hundreds of patients in the emergency room and there's like 5 nurses because the ratios are so bad. So they were getting slammed, okay? They were getting slammed with patients in such a way that it was so unsafe. Nurses in emergency rooms here were having like 20 patients per nurse, 20 COVID patients in an emergency room setting per nurse. How in the world can you keep your eye on 20 COVID patients at a time? That is extremely unsafe. They needed a lot of help, and they needed a lot of help very fast. When I first arrived at my COVID hospital, I thought I was prepared mentally for what I was going to see. I was like, oh, I've traveled, I'm sure it's gonna be bad, but I'm gonna be prepared. When I walked into that emergency room, I was not ready, okay? I was not ready. Like, I thought I was ready, but I wasn't. Then I couldn't breathe because I had on this mask and like patients were like reaching out at my hand. Like, it was wild. And to think that these nurses were out here handling this all by themselves, I was like, oh my goodness, like, God bless you. How? So we came in, just to paint you a picture, the emergency room can hold about 40 patients. There was 120 patients in the emergency room on my first night here. Out of those 120 patients that were there, like 100 of them were there for COVID. So can you imagine like how the whole emergency room was literally full of COVID patients. The whole hospital was full of COVID patients. In other cities, hospitals have like 1 or 2 COVID units where they put all of the COVID patients on the same floor. In New York City, the entire hospitals are COVID. There is no, oh, here's one little floor for COVID or one little section. Everybody's COVID. Everything is COVID. It's dangerous if you come to the hospital and you don't have COVID because your chances of getting COVID are going to be high because almost the whole hospital is COVID. So it was crazy. The nurses were so happy to have us there. We were so happy to be there to be able to help. Generally speaking, people do not realize how new healthcare is. Healthcare is fairly new. CPR was only originated like in the 1950s. Didn't even really start being practiced till the 1960s, which is wild. Can you imagine that when people died back in the day, they fell out and they were just like thumped or just like whatever, like CPR didn't exist. You also have specialties did not exist. So emergency room specialties didn't exist. ICU didn't exist. Specialties didn't start coming around until around the same time, 1950s, 1960s. So prior to this, what were we doing as far as medicine? Doctors and nurses like were doing rotations. They had psychologists rotate and be down in the emergency room. General doctors be in the emergency room. It was residents, just any doctor. If you were a doctor, you could be in the emergency room. They had same thing, rotation going through the ICU before there were specialties for this. So if you're a doctor or you're a nurse, you can work on any specialty on any unit. That is how it used to be. As time evolved and they started creating specialties, in the 1950s, emergency room started to become a specialty, and then they started creating emergency room doctors. So of course it became a change in that. However, in other countries, people don't even do that. I remember I went to a nursing conference in London, and I had a friend in Scotland, and they do their stuff a whole lot differently even than we do. And specialties are something that is special to America. We value our specialties. It's amazing that we have that. If you have a problem, you go to see an endocrinologist. If you have a problem, you go to see a GYN. We didn't always have that. And during a pandemic, we lost that. We lost that specialty during the pandemic because there weren't enough specialties. There are not enough emergency room doctors to fill all the emergency rooms that are overflowing with coronavirus. So what do? We say, hey, are you a doctor? Hey, you're a nurse. You can do it. You can go and work the med-surg floor. You can go and work the ICU. You can go and work the emergency room. You're a doctor, you're a nurse. We've gone back to our primitive ways. On the NIH website, which is the National Institute of Health, there was a quote on there that I really liked. And it said, when I want to understand what is happening today or try to decide what will happen tomorrow, I look back. By Omar Khayyam. I loved it. If you're trying to figure out what in the world kind of medicine we're practicing today, look back. We have just gone back to our primitive ways because we don't have enough resources and we don't have enough hands. So nurses will say, oh, they're putting nurses on all these specialty floors that they don't have any business. They don't know what they're doing. They're murdering people. I have never worked on an ICU floor as a nurse. They sent me to an ICU floor and I was like, oh my goodness, freaking out. I can't do this. Like, I'm not an ICU nurse. I went there. There are some things that I just don't understand because I'm not an ICU nurse. It's not my specialty. However, is it better to have 10 ICU patients on one floor and two ICU nurses taking care of those 10 patients? Or is it better to have 10 patients on an ICU floor, 2 ICU nurses, and 3 non-ICU nurses helping. That gives you 5 nurses and 10 patients. Way more safe, even if those nurses are not ICU nurses. As a nurse, even though I'm not ICU, I went to nursing school. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a nurse. I felt pretty comfortable taking care of this ICU patient and used certain things to watch for. I'm an emergency room nurse. There were certain things I was not aware of, certain ventilation settings that I'm not super comfortable with, certain tube feeding stuff. I'm like, I haven't tube fed someone in so long. But those things come back to you. You can ask for help. Like, there are other nurses there that you can say, hey, just show me how to do this really quick. It's not a life or death. At the end of the day, if something went wrong with my patient, life or death, I knew what to do. So it may not be your most comfortable setting. There are doctors on the ICU floor that are not ICU doctors, and people are saying, oh, you have doctors practicing outside of their specialty. Well, do you rather have, there's only a handful of ICU doctors. Well, what do you do when the ICU needs more doctors? What did they do back in the day? There were no specialties. You made your rotations. So it may not be the American care, the top-notch specialized care that we usually give, because we have not had the resources to be able to do that. There are doctors here volunteering and not even getting paid. So we're trying to utilize all the resources we have to do the best that we have, and for someone to call it murder blows my mind, personally. I've worked in rural Alaska. I was living there for a little while, and it blew my mind, in the emergency room there, the ER doctors were primary care physicians, and that was like a huge ethical dilemma even for me when I was out there, because I learned that only about 50% of the emergency room doctors in America are actually emergency board certified. So having a primary care doctor in the emergency room happens and has been happening in the United States even pre-COVID now, but no one is saying that nurses in Alaska are murdering patients, but they're literally, when I was in rural Alaska, they were operating in the same way pre-COVID. This was years ago. They're operating in the same way that you could arguably say we're operating in now with the COVID. But because it's in Alaska, no one's really paying attention to that, versus being in New York City, people have higher expectations because this is more Americanized. I even worked in rural Massachusetts, and we didn't have any resources out there either. There's a lot of places in America that do not have certain resources, that are not operating at the quote-unquote expected optimum level, even pre-COVID. But people aren't talking about this. So for people to be bringing it up now during a pandemic and trying to throw New York City under the bus and saying they're not practicing, they're murdering people, it's like people have been practicing like this in America for years in other cities when there was no pandemic. And you guys weren't calling them out, you know what I mean? So it's like, this is not anything new. Practicing in a pandemic state of mind, which is not using specialty doctors, using people that are not experienced in that field, that is something that has been going on for a long time in America before COVID. I remember back in nursing school, we had to take an ethics class. And I remember we were like, why do we have to take this ethics class? Like, this has nothing to do with nursing. Oh my goodness, I was so wrong. I have used information from that ethics class so much. So sorry, teachers. So, ethics. If you guys are familiar with ethical dilemmas, nursing and healthcare is nothing but ethical dilemmas. So there are a few definitions that I want to go over with you guys. So just bear with me. After I go over these definitions, I will go in a little bit deeper into specific examples. But I really want to share these definitions because they will give you pretty much like a ground premise for where it is that I'm coming from. So bear with me through these definitions. Ethical dilemma. Definition. A situation in which two or more potential actions appear to be equally justifiable from an ethical point of view. For example, one must choose between the lesser of two evils or the greater of two goods. So this whole thing is an ethical dilemma. What do you choose? Do you say, okay, we're only going to use certified specialized ICU nurses and then just be completely outnumbered and people are going to die? Or do we send in non-specialized ICU nurses and try to let them help out? People may still die, but you're probably going to lose less. So it's an ethical dilemma. It's almost a lose-lose in a sense, but you're going to try your hardest to try to do something. So that's what they did. Some people don't agree with the decision that was made as far as, oh, I didn't feel safe, or patient safety was lost because you had people practicing outside of their specialty. Well, like I said, specialties are a new thing that we have gotten spoiled to. But back in the day, there was no specialty. So, ethical dilemma. The next ethical definition is going to be ethical reasoning, making a decision in response to a moral dilemma based on a careful and thorough assessment of the different options in light of the facts and circumstances and ethical considerations. And then you have ethical relativism, that is the view that ethical standards are relative to a particular culture, society, historical period, etc. When in Rome, do as Romans do. So, when in New York, do as New Yorkers do. Pretty much. So that is ethical relativism. So to me, it's relative based on what city you're in, which pandemic you're in, what the situation is like. It is all relative. What you do that is ethically okay in Orlando, Florida, may not be ethically possible in New York City. It's different. It's just very different. It's a huge ethical dilemma. One of the last ethical definitions is the word error, E-R-R-O-R. It is an unintended adverse outcome, a mistake. Errors, they are made. One of my favorite ethical definitions was the word benevolence, which just means the quality of being well-meaning. So there's a lot of benevolence going on here. There's a lot of well-meaning things going on. So I want to address some of the specific stuff that some people have been mentioning in their videos or certain articles that are just like not true. So one of the things that someone had said was that you had nurses here in New York City sitting in hotels while they were needing help at hospitals. So our agencies, there are tons of different agencies here. They put in so much hard work to get thousands of nurses here in like a week. Like they did it in like a very short period of time. Like I got a call, let's say like on a Tuesday, got booked. I was here by like Thursday morning. You know, it was very fast. They got so many nurses here, but then it takes a while to try to get everything organized. So even when we got here, I did not get put to work right away. We came to the hotel. They had to like situate and split up, like the nurses try to split them up evenly amongst the hospitals. And that did take a little while. Like it took 1 day for some. It took 2 days. I was here for 2 days before I got told which hospital to go to. So yes, technically I was here in New York, quote unquote, sitting around waiting to get my assignment while nurses needed help. But that wasn't done maliciously. It wasn't done in a way of like, oh, we have nurses just here hanging out. Like we were technically on call. So if they figured out, some people, they figured out where they needed to go by noon, they got up in the middle of the day and went directly to that facility. It just took a while to try to get things organized because it was all done so quickly, like so quickly. And they did literally the best that they can do to try to get us assigned as quickly as possible. And I take my hat off to all of the agencies because to deal with thousands of nurses, not only nurses, but PAs, nurse practitioners, respiratory therapists, like all of these different specialties. I also wanted to clarify some things about receiving oxygen and ventilation. So we have been giving oxygen to everybody. I'm not sure where people are getting from that we're just like not giving oxygen out. Everyone that needs oxygen has received oxygen, whether it's from a nasal cannula, from a non-rebreather. Somebody was saying something like we just like to intubate people, and once you put them on a ventilator, like they're never gonna come off. We're just killing people. First of all, rewind. We do not like to put people on ventilators. For the sake of how much we can help it, we do not want to put you on a ventilator at all. Because 2 reasons. 1, it is true, once you go on a ventilator, it's very hard to get off of it with this disease. And then 2, there are not a whole lot of ventilators. So we're not just gonna be handing them out to people. Oh, you're not doing well on 6 liters nasal cannula, here's a ventilator. That is not how that works. We have been doing non-rebreathers, we've been doing high flow oxygen, we've been doing all sorts of different oxygen therapies to try to prevent the ventilator. We're using that as literally the last resort. So another point that I really want to make, that I really want you to absorb, is how new this illness is to the medicine industry. So let's just think about like coronary artery disease, heart attack, stuff like that. When people were first having chest pains and stuff like that in the 1700s, they were like, what is this? They started trying to investigate it. 1700s, 1800s, they were trying to investigate coronary issues. All the way into the 1800s and into the 1900s. When they first started trying to investigate heart attacks and angina and all of that stuff, some people said, oh, leave it alone. It's no big deal. Like, it's nothing. Some people didn't think it was that serious. But then other researchers continued to look into it. And now here we are. We're very familiar with heart attacks. We know what to do in event of heart attacks. Research continues to go, but for the most part, we have a baseline of what a heart attack is, a baseline of how it's caused, a baseline of how to treat it. We've had years of research with heart attacks, diabetes, certain illnesses, but go back and think about when they were first discovered, how people were practicing then, how many lives were lost when people were trying to figure out what in the world was this heart chest pain. They didn't know what it was. So many lives were lost. In the same way with the coronavirus, we are literally trying to figure out what this virus does, the pathophysiology of this virus. At the same time, we are trying to treat this virus in the same moment of trying to figure everything out about it. Every week, they're finding something new. Every day, we're seeing something new. We're seeing a different symptom. We're seeing a different perspective of what to look at. Unfortunately, people are dying. Most people are not dying. However, people are dying. For example, some people are passing away from things that we did not realize were a symptom of COVID. So one of the things that people started having were blood clots. When COVID first came out, they were like, oh, it's respiratory. Oh, some people were saying, oh, it's like the flu, it's no different from the flu, and then it started progressing, right? Well, now something we started seeing was you would see someone, they would be perfectly fine, 100% on oxygen, and then all of a sudden they die out of nowhere, and you're like, whoa, what just happened? They threw a blood clot, and then it's like, oh, wow, you're getting blood clots with COVID. So now we start treating blood clots with a lot of our COVID patients. We're looking for that on the chest x-ray. We're treating, somebody in an article said that we're not giving antibiotics and we're not giving the Plaquenil medication and vitamin C. We're giving all of these things. We're giving vitamin C. We're giving Plaquenil. We're giving Zithromax. We're giving antibiotics. We're giving all sorts of stuff. Anything that we think will help, we are giving it. If anything, to be honest, patients are refusing a lot of the stuff, which they have the right to do. But a lot of the patients, when you try to give them certain medications, Plaquenil and certain things like that, they don't want it. And you're like, why don't you want it? And I think for them, it's like, it's all new information. Like, is this gonna actually help me? Am I just like a lab test? I get it. Everything is a test. But that's why medicine is called a practice. They go to someone and they say, hey, what's your practice specialty? And they say, what doctor? If you're a doctor, they say, what do you practice? Because at the end of the day, as much hope and everything that we want to put in medicine, as much firmness and factuality we want to put in medicine, at the end of the day, medicine has always been a practice. It's literally people who've gone to school who are making the best practice judgment on what's going on and trying to treat it. So in this COVID thing, we are doing just that. We are practicing medicine. We are practicing, this week they researched this and we're gonna try this. Next week they researched this and we're gonna try this. It's just happening so quickly. There was also someone who has said something like, we are not doing CPR on our patients that are full COVID, so we're just letting them die. I have done CPR. I have gotten blood on my ear from an HIV patient from doing some aggressive CPR. So I don't know what these people are talking about. Like, we are doing CPR. I have friends at six other different New York hospitals who are doing these things. We are doing CPR. We are doing life-saving measures on these patients. Unless they refuse it, then we don't do it if they're DNR or anything like that. But I am just so confused towards where all of these things are coming from. Granted, that might have happened at someone's hospital. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened somewhere. It may have happened at someone's hospital. But at the same time, I will say that's not the majority of what's going on. That is not for someone to make blanket statements and say, this is what's going on in New York City, and then the person's not even here. I'm like, I don't know what hospital that person was at, but I'm sorry that you were dealing with that doctor. Or, before COVID, there were not good doctors and there were not good nurses. Not every nurse and every good doctor is a good doctor, period, even before COVID. So during COVID, it's the same thing. If you're working with a doctor that's not that good or a nurse that's not that good, certain things might be happening that should not be happening. And that's unfortunate. But don't say that that's just all of New York and that New York is out here killing folk, because that's not the case. As far as PPE goes and people only changing their gloves and whatnot, I will say when this whole COVID thing first started, PPE was a huge problem in New York because it was new. They didn't have enough PPE. I mean, it all happened so fast. So initially, PPE was a huge problem. A lot of hospitals were actually going on strike and all of these things to try to get more PPE. After they protested and everything like that, I would say early April, late March, early April, the PPE situation got a lot better. I have been here in New York City for 31 days actually now. And out of the 31 days of being here, I have only had 3 days off. Hence my extremely baggy eyes and crazy bushy eyebrows and everything like that. But I've only had three nights off. I've had PPE every single day. Some days, they don't have like as much, but I've gotten a mask. That was a huge thing. Even at my facility, they started, first they told us we were gonna have to use the same mask for 3 days, but then by early April, they got a huge shipment of masks to New York, and we were getting a new mask every day. We have tons of gowns. I mean, I have never felt unprotected. They actually just yesterday decided to test my blood to look for like COVID antibodies, check for the viral load, since we've been exposed so much, to see if it's in my blood. And I was really excited to see the test. If it was greater than 1.3, they were kind of like diagnosing you with antibodies. I got my test back, I was 0.0. I was so upset. I have no antibodies towards COVID. But at the same time, that means that my PPE and everything was very good. I haven't had any exposure, which baffles me, to be honest. Or my immune system is just that great, but I'm gonna go with the PPE. But I mean, that's how protective I've been. I have zero exposure in my blood. I haven't had any problems as far as that since we've been here. Gloves have never been a problem. None of these things have been a problem. Not recently. Like I said, they were a problem when COVID first came out. But at the same time, of course they were a problem. Nobody was expecting a pandemic and needing all of this PPE. But eventually the PPE did get here. Unfortunately, it did get here kind of late in a sense where a lot of nurses, even at my facility and around, combined with other facilities, did pass away. We did actually lose quite a bit of nurses that were exposed to COVID, contracted the virus, and did pass away from it. So unfortunately, that did happen. However, ever since the early stages of COVID, we've been good. We haven't been losing nurses like that anymore and things like that. So we're grateful for the expansion of the PPE, and we're so sorry that lives had to have been lost. So I just want you guys to really keep that in mind when you think about, like, we're doing the best that we can. The doctors are really doing the best that they can. Some doctors are not good doctors, and some nurses are not good nurses, and that doesn't change just because COVID is here. But for the most part, I feel like most people are doing the best that they can do. Unfortunately, we are still losing lives, and unfortunately, we still don't know a lot about COVID. I would say, let's say 5 years down the road, we'll probably have so much information about COVID that we'd be ready for another one at any moment. But at this moment, everything changes day by day. The things that we practice change day by day. We're just trying to keep up with everything, trying to keep up with the research, and trying to keep up with the overwhelming population of people here in New York City that have the virus. Just like the definition of the word error was an unintended adverse outcome. Unintended adverse outcome. So any adverse outcome that wasn't intentional, it was an error. It was unintended. We were not, whether it's a doctor, nurse, any of these people, no one here is intending to just kill people, to murder people. As a matter of fact, the definition of murder, the unlawful, premeditated killing of one human being by another. That is not what we're doing. We are not murdering people. No one is premeditatively, intentionally killing anyone. If anything, the only definition that actually is any close to it would be suicide. If anything, the doctors or nurses here are committing suicide, because the definition of suicide is the act or an instance of taking one's own life voluntarily and intentionally, or the ruin of one's interests. All these nurses and doctors are going in voluntarily, going in to try to help. They're technically committing suicide. They're going in to help, not knowing if they're even fully protected, not knowing if their mask is working, not knowing like if they're gonna contract the virus themselves or anything like that. My family, I've been here for a month, and they're just scared every day because I'm not that old. I'm pretty young, but at the same time, you don't know. There's young people that die that have no comorbidities. So it's like, who knows if I contract the virus, if I'm going to make it. It is technically a suicide mission. So for people to be, risking their lives, and like I said, even me being here at the hospital, there has been nurses, like even at my own hospital, who have been out sick for weeks. Like they were here when I came, and now they're not here anymore. And it's like, imagine if we didn't come to help. Like, they would have like no staff, because a lot of their staff is out sick. A lot of their staff, did contract COVID. Last time the numbers were at my hospital, 60% of the staff at our facility had contracted the COVID virus. That is a high percentage. You know what I mean? So not only are the COVID patients coming in such a high number, but then you're losing a lot of your staff. So you have to do what you have to do when it comes to a pandemic. I think to say that nurses and doctors are out here murdering people is a bit harsh. However, that's someone's perspective. I will respect your perspective. However, I would not use that term, murder. I think that is kind of overdoing it. But that's just my perspective, in my opinion. In the midst of all of this, there has been a lot of kindness, a lot of advocacy, a lot of beautiful moments that us as nurses have been able to do. I've really taken a lot of pleasure in reading a lot of things that nurses have posted on Instagram, or nurses that I've met here. At our hospital, every time a patient is extubated or removed off of the ventilator machine in a good way, they play a song over the hospital intercom system that we have loved to hear. One of the patients had a birthday in the hospital. He was removed off of the ventilator machine on his birthday. A nurse wrote about it. It was a beautiful thing, a beautiful day. That patient loved his nurse. There are wonderful testimonies and testaments of great things. I have been thanked much by family members, just being able to advocate, because like other people have said, family is not able to be there, but we do try hard. I have been on several FaceTimes with video calls with family members, phone calls, trying to keep them updated, trying to make them feel involved in the care as much as possible. So we're really trying our hardest out here. We're not looking for any praise. I know I'm not. I don't care to be highlighted for anything at all. This is what I signed up for when I became a nurse, was to help people. And I have loved it. I have loved being here. It has been very tiresome. I am very tired. So I'm not here to say like, oh, we're health heroes or any of these things. I'm not even here to try to get a title. I'm just here to paint you guys a perspective. And for the people who are just saying reckless things and trying to spread stuff that people are just being murdered in New York City, I'm just trying to let you know that that's not nice to say. You can continue to say it if that's how you truly feel. But look at it from a different perspective if you can, and just know that that is not our intentions, and that is not what we intend to happen. And to know that it's getting a lot better. Every day it gets better. Every day we're losing less and less people. Every day we're learning more about the virus, and we're able to act accordingly. Every day we're keeping safer. Every day we're getting closer and closer to this thing ending. So I just wish everyone would, hold on. I think, we're definitely moving in the right direction. And don't focus on these small little things that divide us and pull us apart from each other. But just continue to show everybody love, and continue to protect yourself out there in these streets. Peace out from NYC.